Hi, and welcome to Jules Voto's Photo Focus. In this video, I'm going to be going over the basic features and controls of the Nikon D2XS, which was introduced in June of 2006 and was Nikon's last APS-C flagship DSLR. It was replaced in 2007 by Nikon's first flagship full-frame DSLR, the D3. Like all Nikon flagship cameras, it's built like a tank, heavy at 2.4 pounds, without battery. It's weather sealed and ready for almost any abuse it may encounter. So let's start with the top right of the camera. Okay, let me just turn this off. All right, so we have our on-off switch, okay, which has actually 3 positions. On, and this camera turns on instantly. We also have a third position. If we just bring the switch all the way over, we have a light bulb icon which lights up the screen. Now, let me turn the lights off so you can see that. It lights up the LCD panel. All right, lights back on. And of course, in the center here is our shutter release. Now, when you illuminate the LCD with this switch, it will stay on as long as the meter stays on. And that is adjustable. I have it set so that the meter turns on for 8 seconds when I put light pressure on the shutter release. And so will the illuminated LCD. You can change that time in the menus. Next, we have a mode switch here. This mode switch, in conjunction, by pressing it in conjunction with the rear command dial, lets you cycle through the different exposure modes: manual, program, shutter priority, and aperture priority. To the right of that, we have an exposure compensation button. So let's just put this in shutter priority. We press that button, turning it to the right gives us negative exposure compensation in 1/3 stop increments. We could go all the way up to 5 stops. Going the opposite direction, let's get back to 0 compensation here, and we could have plus exposure compensation. And you will notice when that is set, we have a little icon on the LCD panel indicating that some exposure compensation is set, but it will only display the amount of exposure compensation when you hold that button in. You will also notice on the mode button, you see in red here, it says format. That button, I'm jumping a little ahead here, but that button, in conjunction with the button on the back, the trash can icon, when you press them both together, hold them, you will see FOR flashing. Press them again, and that will format the compact flash card in the camera. Okay, now let's talk about the LCD for a minute. It contains a lot of information, this top LCD panel. Right now I have it set for manual exposure. You will see here on the left is our shutter speed. Okay, and on the right is our aperture, settable by the front command dial. So the rear command dial controls shutter speed, the front sub-command dial, our aperture. You also notice an exposure indication here when in manual mode. Right now it is indicating underexposure, and we just adjust our shutter speed down to get proper exposure, okay? We also notice an indication that there is a card in the camera. Now you will also see on the LCD panel this section here, and that shows your AF area mode. And there are 4 AF area modes on the D2XS, and we will get into that when we talk about the back of the camera. This indicates what frame we are on, from the from when we started taking pictures. All right, this is the 19th picture. So now let's go to program mode. Now we no longer see the exposure indicator, but if we adjust exposure compensation, we see that. So there is a lot of information here on the LCD panel. Okay, up here on the prism, we have a meter switch. Okay, right now it's set for matrix. We just press the button in. That is for center weighted metering and spot metering. Now, when we have the meter switch here set to center weighted, the default is that it will concentrate a majority of its sensitivity in an 8mm area, which is etched in the center of the viewfinder. However, you can, going into the custom settings, and it's custom setting B6, you could change that area from the default of 8mm to either 6mm, 10mm, or 13mm, or you could set it to take an average reading over the entire screen. Okay, we also have a eyepiece diopter here. By pulling this out and turning it, you could adjust the view through the finder to your individual eyesight. On top, we have a standard hot shoe, but it comes standard with the camera with a nice protective cover made out of rubber that slides right in. That protects the shoe in the event of weather. Okay, you will also notice this here on the front of the prism, top front of the prism. It is an ambient light sensor, and it is used for one of two methods of preset white balance. And again, when we get to the back of the camera and talk about white balance, I will explain how that works. On the left side of the top of the camera, we have an indication for the focal plane. Okay, if you're doing macro photography, sometimes that could come in handy. Let's go across the rest of the switches on this side, rest of the controls on this side. So we press this button here, and we could adjust the frame rate. So we have single, continuous low, continuous high, self-timer. Now, the self-timer is adjustable. We could set it in custom settings C4 for a delay of either 2, 5, 10, which is a default, or 20 seconds. Let me just demonstrate. If you look here, you will see that it is blinking and the camera fires. Okay, as soon as it stops blinking, the camera will fire. Let me just demonstrate that again. All right, so I believe that was set for a 5-second delay. We also have a mirror up setting here. By pressing the shutter release, the mirror goes up. Press it again. We take the exposure and the mirror drops back down. The continuous low setting is adjustable in the menus as well. Now this is a 12 megapixel camera, and when set for continuous high, it gives us 5 frames a second. If we set it for high-speed crop mode, and that is something we can do in the menus, we now have a 6.8 megapixel area. And it is indicated in the viewfinder masked off. When we talk about the viewfinder, I will show you a page from the instruction manual which shows this cropped area. So when it's set for the high-speed crop mode, continuous high will give us 8 frames a second. Now this is a camera with a APS-C sensor, which Nikon calls DX. I mentioned that earlier. But what it gives you with a 50mm lens, and right now we have a 50mm lens attached, it gives you the field of view of a 75mm lens. When we go to the high-speed crop mode, it is now giving you the field of view of a 100mm lens. And when you look at today's cameras, 45, 60 megapixel, you might think, well, 6.8 isn't very much. Well, I have a picture on my wall in my living room, 24 by 30, that was taken of my 3 kids with a 6 megapixel camera. And unless you put your face right into the picture, it looks fine. So it's not always how many megapixels you have, it's the quality of those megapixels, it's your technique, and of course the quality of the lens you are using. We also have a bracket button. By pressing that, adjusting the main command dial, we could go from a 3-frame bracket to a 5 to a 7 to a 9. Okay, we could also adjust the increments in which it will bracket. That's set right now to 1/3 of a stop. We could go to 2/3 of a stop or a full stop. If we want to take a bracketed sequence, okay, right now the meter is indicating 1/100th of a second at 2.5. I'm going to press the bracket button, set it for 3-frame bracket. Okay, we're going to take the first picture. Then it's going to underexpose 1/3 of a stop at 2.8. And then it's going to overexpose by 1/3 of a stop at 2.2. All right, now you just got to remember to reset this back to 0 if you don't want to take any more bracketed exposures. All right, so now let me set this back to manual exposure mode. Okay, and I'm going to press the L button here. Turn the main command dial, which controls the shutter speed, and you will notice a little L here. Hope you can see that. What that does is it locks in that shutter speed at 1/100th of a second. You can't accidentally change it. You could also do the same for the aperture. Press that button in again and turn the sub command dial on the front of the camera, and you will see an L near the aperture. And at that point, you can't change either setting. This works out good if you're using Studio Flash and you have a setup. You have determined the exposure, and so you don't accidentally want to change it. I use the shutter speed and aperture lock when doing prom photos. I have one lighting set up so I don't accidentally change either my shutter speed or aperture. And just by pressing that button again and turning the main command dial, you remove the lock. We're going to do the same thing for the aperture. Finally, on this side, you have the lightning bolt, which is for your flash. Okay, right now it's set for normal flash. If you look at this little window down here, now we have for slow sync, for rear curtain sync, for red eye reduction, and then slow sync speed with red eye reduction. This camera has no built-in flash. However, these settings, which we just went through, work with a dedicated flash in the hot shoe or connected with a off-camera shoe cord. Okay, let's come to the front of the camera. Okay, on the right side here we have a depth of field preview button. I have the aperture is at what, 5.6 I believe? Yes. With this button here, it's stopping the lens down to 5.6. The button on the bottom here, on the right front of the camera, is a function button. I have it set for spot metering. So if I have the camera, let's say, set for matrix metering, and I decide I want to take a spot reading, I just have to hold that button in and take my reading. It also can be used in conjunction with the main command dial for various functions. On the other side of the camera, we have a PC, threaded PC connection here that has this little cover on it. We'll just unscrew that cover. Okay, let's remove this cover. Just threads in here, and then we could plug in our Studio Flash. Okay, and below that we have a 10-pin connector for various accessories, a remote release is probably the most common. Below that we have our standard Nikon lens release, and you should always remove your lenses with the camera off. Speaking about that, about lenses, this camera will work with any Nikon f-mount autofocus lens. It will also work with manual focus lenses that are AI, AIS, or AI. You cannot use a pre-AI lens on this camera. You will cause some damage. So if you have one of those old manual focus lenses and you'd like to use it, lens pre-1977, just have it AI'd, modified so it will work on this camera. The other control here on the front, we have a switch that we go from manual to single to continuous focus. All right? Now, one other thing when mounting a lens. I just want to come back up here to the LCD panel. If you have one of these lenses with a CPU, such as this autofocus lens, it must be stopped down to f22. And most of those lenses also have a lock that locks it in at f22. See, I can't change the aperture right now. So I'm just going to remove that lock. I'm going to set it, let's say, to 5.6 and mount it back on the camera. Let's turn the camera on, and you notice I get the indication FEE here on the LCD panel. That indicates that the lens is not stopped down to its minimum aperture. So I'm going to do that now, and then you notice the FEE disappears. It's just an error message. Okay, let's come to the back of the camera. A lot of buttons and controls on digital cameras. Not simple like the old manual film cameras. Okay, so right here we have a playback button. By pressing this button, it will display, and this is just the out of focus shot of my setup here, but it will display the last image you took, and you could cycle through those images by using this multi-selector here, and you can see that bracketed sequence. Okay, you also have a trash icon. Okay, by pressing that, it's basically asking you, do you want to delete that image? Press it again, and it's deleted. Let's go across the top, and then we'll go to the bottom. This is an eyepiece shutter. It just prevents light from entering the viewfinder and messing with your reading. Okay, on the right side here, we have an AE and AE lock and AF lock, so auto exposure and autofocus lock. Let's say you went to that spot metering. You're in a backlit situation. You meter on the subject. You then would press this button in to hold that exposure, recompose, and fire your shot. So it would hold the focus and it would hold the exposure. You also have an AF on button. Now normally you're going to press your shutter release lightly to initiate autofocus. So what is the purpose of this AF on button? Normally you will initiate autofocus by pressing on the shutter release. However, some people like to use what's called back button focus. So they take the autofocus off of the shutter release and put it on this button here. And the way you do that is you have to go into the menu system, into the custom settings, and you go to custom setting A5. There are two settings there, AF on and shutter release, or AF on only. And by setting it to AF on only, autofocus will only initiate by holding in this button. So where would you use that? Quick example, if you're in continuous autofocus, and continuous autofocus, as long as you are either pressing the AF on button or holding light pressure on the shutter release, the camera will continuously focus. So let's say you're shooting some action in continuous, but now you see something else. You want to shoot, let's say it's a bird flying, and now you see he has landed. So what you do is you hold in your AF on button to achieve focus, and then you release it. Now the focus has been achieved on the standing bird, and when you release that button, the camera is no longer auto-focusing, and you can recompose if you'd like and press the shutter release and take the picture. And then if that bird takes off again, just press in the AF on button to keep focus on him as he flies. So what else do we have on the back of the camera? Of course, we have the main command dial, which we have talked about previously. All right, so now let's come over here and go to the other side. Okay, we have our menu button, and there's a lot going on in this camera. Right now, it's set for the custom setting menu, which there's a bunch of things you can do. There's the shooting menu. You can change file naming, image quality from here, go into the high-speed crop mode that we talked about earlier. Okay, right here it's off. We go down here, it's on. And to lock in these settings, you just press the multi-selector to the right. So now you see high-speed crop is on. I'm just going to take it off. Okay, we also have our custom setting menus, as I said. We have the setup menu. We could adjust LCD brightness. There's all kinds of, there's voice memos, and we'll get into that in a minute. Also battery info. It gives you the condition of your battery. There's also an indication on the LCD panel, I don't think I mentioned that, for how much battery power you have left. Okay. Come down here, and this is going to show your recent settings, so that's nice. Now, the most recent thing we changed was that high-speed crop, and you see that comes to the top of the recent settings. Again, there's so much here in the menu system that it would take a long time to go through everything, so we're not going to do that. That's also the playback menu, and there are a lot of things you can do. So let's get out of that menu now, and this button works in conjunction with the playback button. And okay, so now we see 9 images. Previously, we saw 4 images. Okay. Also, if one of those images is particularly important to us and we don't want to accidentally delete it, we can just press this lock button, and you see that icon appears on that image. Okay, we press it again to remove it. That would just keep us from accidentally deleting that image if we were using the trash can icon to delete some images. With that lock button applied, it's not going to happen. Okay, this is a magnifier here. Okay, we press that and we get a magnified view of a particular image. We could zoom in even more, holding down this button here and turning the main command dial. Okay, these images are out of focus and they look really bad because this is just showing part of the copy stand that I have my camera that I'm filming with on. Okay, these are not quality images. Here we have a microphone, and this button allows us, now if we have an image displayed, and let me just make that image. Okay, here's our image displayed. And let's say we want to say something about that image, either caption information or the location where it was taken or whatever. You just press and hold this microphone button, and you will see the microphone flashing. It is now recording as long as I press it in. There's a couple other ways to use this. Okay, it will record. The time you can record also can be changed in the menus. All right, so now what happens is it attaches a WAV file to that image. You open it on your computer, you will be able to listen to the whatever you recorded. All right, so I kind of jumped over some of these things here. So why don't we talk about this lower LCD panel? Many Nikon professional DSLRs have this additional small LCD panel. on the back of the camera. So this one here is our ISO button. Okay, right now it's set for 800, and we could cycle down in 1/3 stop increments. Not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but again, through the menu system, you could set your ISO to go in 1/3 stops, like I have it set, or half stops, or even full stops. Also, the same holds true for your aperture and shutter speed. It could either be set for 1/3 stops, half stops, or full stops. Okay, next we have a quality button. All right, right now I just have it set for RAW, and we could set it for many different RAW plus JPEG, just JPEG, TIFF files, whatever. I generally just shoot in RAW. We also could set white balance here. Okay, auto white balance, tungsten, fluorescent, a sunny day, flash, studio flash, cloudy day, in open shade. You could set it for color temperature if you know the color temperature of the lights you're shooting in. If you're doing, let's say, a sporting event, you could hold that white balance button down and using the front dial, the sub-command dial, adjust the color temperature. And then the final setting is preset or custom white balance. Now I mentioned that ambient light sensor on the front of the camera. The way this works, there's two ways to do it. One is to use the ambient light sensor on the front of the camera. That sensor must be in the same light as your subject. So what you do is you just hold the white balance button down until it flashes. Then you press the function button on the front of the camera, and it takes a reading of the ambient light. Now, I find that doesn't work that well. So I think it's much better to use a more traditional way. And this was dropped after the D2XS. The D3 uses a method I'm going to show you now. So you basically do the same thing. You're pressing and holding the white balance button until it starts flashing. You then fill the frame with either a gray card, 18% gray, or a white card, and you press the shutter release. You need to fill the frame with the white or the gray card. Once you fill the frame, you then press the shutter release, and it records the white balance off that particular surface that you've aimed the camera at, either the white card or the gray card. That seems to work much better, giving you very accurate white balance. One other thing, don't worry about focus at that point. The camera doesn't have to be in focus. The frame just has to be filled with that card. So probably the best way to do that, because if you try to focus on a plain card, the camera's not going to focus and you won't be able to take a picture. So just set the camera to manual focus, press the shutter release, and the camera will record that white balance. You will see in the viewfinder, it will say good if it was able to achieve a custom white balance, or no good. If it's no good, you might have to adjust your settings, because the exposure, it needs to be a proper exposure or close to it in order to achieve that white balance. All right, so now coming back over to this side, we have our multi-selector, which we have talked about previously. We use this to, in conjunction with the menus, to change settings. We also can use it to select our focus points in the viewfinder. There are 11 focus points. By the way, when you're using the high-speed crop mode, there's only 9 focus points. Okay, you lose the 2 outer points, but the center 9 focus points are all cross-type. The outer 2 are not. There's also a lock on this multi-selector. Just flip it over to L, and now the LCD, now you're not going to be able to change focus points. You use that if you want that focus point fixed and you don't accidentally want to change it. Sometimes your nose may hit, depending on which eye you use to view through your camera. Your nose may hit that multi-selector and change it when you don't want it to. All right, right below this now, we have the AF area mode selector. Okay, right now it is set for single AF, We then come up here, and it's for dynamic area AF. And the way that works, you select the focus area using the multi-selector, but then the camera uses information from multiple focus areas to determine focus. So if the subject leaves the selected focus area, the camera will focus based on information from other focus areas. Next, we have group dynamic AF. And with this, the user selects a focus area group, which is a center point surrounded by 4 other points. And finally, we have dynamic area AF with closest subject priority. The camera selects focus area containing principal subject closest to the camera. So you are not selecting the actual focus point, the camera is. And that's something that works far better on today's modern cameras. Okay, another thing on the back of the camera, if we want to change the compact flash card, there's an LED here that lights up when images are being written to the card. So you should not open the compact flash door when that light is lit. Okay, so to remove or insert a compact flash card, we just open this little door here, press that button, the door pops open, then we press this gray button there, and we can pull the card out. Now, you will notice the way this card only goes in one way, and it goes in with the label, the front label, facing the right side of the camera. And place the card in, press it all the way down. Now keep an eye on that little LED. Okay, lights up green when it's inserted, and this switch, this button pops up. We then close the door. Now, at this point, normally, if you've taken all your images off the card and you're reinserting the card back in the camera, you will use that 2-button format. Okay, holding, as I showed you earlier, holding these 2 buttons in until format flashes, and then do it again. Okay, just remember, you were erasing, when you do that format, as I said earlier, you are erasing all the images. Now this camera has a built-in vertical grip. So you have a duplication of the AF on button here. You have a duplication of the main command dial. You also have a duplication of the sub-command dial. And you have a vertical shutter release. Right now it's set to on. And now it won't work. When we come to the bottom of the camera, we have a standard tripod socket. We also have a connector here for an optional wireless local area network adapter. It's under this rubber cover. So that's basically it for all the controls on the camera. Again, as I said, there's much more that you can do with the menus. Okay, now let's go over the viewfinder. Quite a bit of information in the viewfinder. In the center here, you see a representation of the focusing screen and the 11 focusing points. Okay, we also see here the 8mm circle in the center of the viewfinder, where again, if you're set for the default setting for center weighted metering, it concentrates a lot of its sensitivity in that center area. These 9 points towards the center here are all cross type. The left and the right sensor are not. You see here how those points cover a good bit of the viewfinder. On the right, we have all sorts of information. I'm not going to go over everything, but this showing the microphone, your white balance, whether you set for bracketing. You have flash, different types of white balance. Not all of this will be displayed. What will be displayed will be what is being used at that time. Okay, your ISO, what it's set for. There's also the display panel on the bottom. On the bottom of the viewfinder, we have our focus indicator. Okay, if that circle lights up, we are in focus. If one of the ones to the left or the right do, we are out of focus, or if the camera cannot achieve focus, if you tried, let's say, to focus on that gray card that we talked about earlier, both of these will flash. If you're in manual focus, if you have either a non-CPU lens or you just want to manually focus your autofocus lens, this bracket on the right indicates turn the focus ring to the right until that center spot lights up. If this one is lit, it means turn it to the right. Okay, gives us our battery indication, what our color settings may be. Here it's indicating black and white. This is, we got our shutter speed and aperture displayed here. It will tell us what exposure mode we are in, program, shutter priority, aperture priority, manual. It gives an exposure scale, flash ready light if you're using a dedicated flash. If that lights up, it means the flash is ready to fire. If this lightning bolt icon flashes after taking a flash picture, it could mean that either the flash fired at full power or that the exposure was incorrect. Finally, let's look at this high-speed crop mode. When you are set for high-speed crop mode, you will have an indication similar to this in the viewfinder. The outer areas will be grayed out. You'll still be able to see a little, but they'll be grayed out. So this is the area in which you are photographing. If you are shooting with an older manual focus lens without a CPU, all the AF lenses have a CPU, and you will see those contacts on the side of the lens that mounts to the camera. But if you're using one of these older lenses, and again, as I stated earlier, if you're going to use a manual focus lens, it must be an AI, AIS, or AI'd lens. AI'd means, and I'm going to state this again because it's so important, AI'd means that it was an older lens, a pre-AI or a non-AI lens that was modified to work on AI cameras. Okay, if you use one of those older lenses that was not AI'd, you're going to damage the camera. So when you are using those lenses, what you must do is go to the shooting menu, come down here to non-CPU lens data, and then you could set in the focal length. All right, so let's say we have a 24 millimeter lens. We just move over to the right to indicate OK. We then come down, well, actually it is a 2.8, but let's say we had the 24 2.0. Okay, and now if we take pictures with that lens, the camera is going to know the focal length, and it will report that in the data that's attached to every file. If you were using center weighted metering, you will only have available that 8 millimeter area for your center weighted metering, using that 8 millimeter reference circle in the viewfinder. Okay, so that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I come out with a new video every Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. And I know I didn't cover everything on this D2XS. There's just so much. However, if you have any questions, if something I said was unclear, please email me or leave a question. I try to answer all questions. So thanks for watching. I will talk to you next time.